The Los Angeles County Courthouse always carried a certain heaviness, but that morning it felt especially suffocating. The ceiling fans whirred lazily above the crowded gallery, yet nothing seemed to move the thick weight of tension that pressed down on every person in the room. Rows of spectators filled the wooden benches, their eyes darting between the stern-faced judge, the polished prosecutor, and the lanky young man standing at the defense table. Whispers rippled through the audience like small currents of electricity, each murmur feeding into the other until the room buzzed with quiet anticipation. They weren't just here for another case. They were here to witness a spectacle. At the front, Judge Walter Grayson leaned back in his oversized leather chair, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm against the mahogany desk. A man in his early 60s, Grayson carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed he had already seen every trick in the book. His salt-and-pepper hair was slicked back, his glasses perched low on his nose, and his lips curved in a perpetual smirk that never quite reached his eyes. To him, this was just another day, another defendant, another chance to play God in a room where his gavel reigned supreme. The defendant, however, didn't look like the typical man who stood trial in front of Grayson. 19-year-old Jalen Dawson shifted slightly in his seat, his hands still tucked into the pockets of his plain black hoodie. He was tall, but lean, with sharp features and an intensity in his eyes that betrayed none of the nervousness expected from someone facing grand theft auto and resisting arrest charges. While others his age memorized basketball stats or scrolled endlessly through TikTok, Jalen had grown up memorizing case law and cross-examinations. The courtroom for most was a place of fear. For him, it was familiar territory, even if he never expected to sit on the defendant's side. His mother, Denise Dawson, sat in the gallery behind him, her face lined with years of exhaustion, but her eyes burning with quiet strength. Denise had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades, often bringing home stories of prosecutors cutting corners, defense attorneys phoning it in, and judges who cared more about their golf games than about justice. Jalen had soaked up every word, every lesson, every warning. By 14, he could dismantle trial transcripts better than most law students. By 16, he was arguing mock trials against himself in the mirror, imagining how he would one day defend the innocent. Ironically, fate placed him not behind a defense table as a lawyer, but in front of it as a defendant. Judge Grayson glanced down at the case file with disinterest, flipping through the pages with exaggerated boredom. "Grand theft auto. Resisting arrest," he said in a tone that suggested he had already decided the outcome. "Well, Mr. Dawson, this doesn't look good for you." He peered over his glasses, his eyes narrowing on the young man. "Do you think you're some kind of legal expert? This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles broke out across the courtroom. The bailiff smirked. The stenographer suppressed a grin. Even the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, allowed himself a smug smile. It was a room united in their amusement at the young man's expense. Everyone except Jalen. Jalen didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't bow his head in shame. He simply stared back, his chin lifted slightly, his expression calm but unyielding. In that silence, something subtle shifted. The laughter died down, and the tension returned, sharper than before. Carrington rose from his seat with the polished confidence of a man who had delivered this routine 100 times before. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried the rhythm of a practiced orator. He strutted toward the jury box, every step echoing with self-assurance. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence, as you will see, speaks for itself." The words landed heavily. People in the gallery murmured in agreement, nodding their heads. A stolen car, a chase, running from the police. On the surface, it sounded clear-cut, undeniable. Judge Grayson smirked again, glancing at Jalen. "Go on, counselor," he said lazily. Carrington turned sharply, locking eyes with Jalen. The defense may try to convince you this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson here is some unfortunate victim of circumstance, but let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police? The question hung in the air like a noose, tightening around Jalen's neck. The gallery leaned forward, eager to see how he would squirm. Grayson rested his chin on his hand, already looking convinced. Jalen remained silent, his eyes steady, his posture unshaken. Cardington smirked, flipping through a stack of papers with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Ruiz, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before attempting to flee. The car was confirmed stolen, and the arrest was made by the book. The facts are simple. The case is clear." "Sounds straightforward to me," Judge Grayson muttered, tapping his gavel lightly against the desk. A ripple of agreement ran through the gallery. Jalen's lips twitched, just slightly, just enough to reveal the faintest trace of a smirk. No one noticed except his mother, who had seen that look before. It was the same expression he wore when he had already spotted the flaw in someone's argument, when he was about to take apart an opponent piece by piece. The judge turned to the defense table. "Let's hear the response," he said dismissively. Jalen's public defender, Lisa Thornton, shifted nervously in her chair. She had barely said 3 words since the hearing began, and her voice shook as she stood. "Your Honor, my client—" Jalen placed a hand gently on her arm. It was a silent but firm request. She froze, uncertain, then sat back down. For the first time, Jalen spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and carried through the courtroom with unexpected weight. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went silent. The gallery froze. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Cardington blinked in disbelief before letting out a sharp laugh. "Yo, what?" "I'll be defending myself," Jalen repeated, his tone unwavering. A murmur spread like wildfire across the gallery. Some whispered in disbelief. Others scoffed at the audacity. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, clearly entertained. "Well, this should be interesting," he said with a chuckle. But the laughter didn't last long, because the moment Jalen took his first step forward, something shifted again. The air seemed to thicken, the tension mounting as all eyes followed the young man. He adjusted his stance, hands still in his pockets, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the room uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Cardington crossed his arms, smirking. "Go ahead." "You said Officer Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" "That's right," Cardington replied, his voice dripping with condescension. Jalen nodded slowly, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." The gallery gasped. Grayson narrowed his eyes. "On what grounds?" "Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car," Jalen said firmly, pulling his hands from his pockets for the first time. "In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." The words sliced through the courtroom like a blade. For the first time, Cardington faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" Jalen took a step forward, his eyes locked on the judge. "Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then his location history should confirm it." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, but I have a feeling it won't. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Grayson frowned, glancing at Cardington, whose jaw tightened. The polished confidence was slipping. And in that moment, for the first time since the trial began, the balance of power shifted. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Every pair of eyes shifted from Jalen to Prosecutor Carrington, waiting for a rebuttal, waiting for the confident attorney to dismiss the teenager's bold claim. But Carrington's lips pressed into a thin line as he shuffled through his neatly stacked files. For the first time since he strutted into the courtroom that morning, his rhythm was off. He found the report, scanned it, then looked up with forced calm.
Officer Ruiz stated in his written testimony that he witnessed you behind the wheel. His word is credible. He is a decorated officer. Jalen tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but his tone razor-sharp. A decorated officer is still capable of lying. That's why evidence exists, to support testimony. Without supporting evidence, his words are just that, words. A ripple of murmurs surged through the gallery. Some spectators nodded, others exchanged surprised glances. Carrington opened his mouth to retort, but Jalen continued before he could. "And let's talk about fingerprints, shall we?" Jalen said, stepping closer to the jury box. His voice carried a deliberate calm, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate incision. "The prosecution claims my fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. That sounds convincing until you realize something important. I test drove that exact same Audi 3 days before it was reported stolen." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Some raised their eyebrows. Jalen turned sharply, addressing Carrington directly. "Did the prosecution run a full fingerprint analysis to determine when those prints were left, or did you just assume?" Carrington straightened his shoulders, trying to regain control. "The presence of your fingerprints is incriminating, regardless of when they were left." "That's not how science works," Jalen replied coolly. "Fingerprints don't come with timestamps. You're asking this jury to believe that I stole a car simply because my fingerprints were on it, when in reality, they could have been there from days earlier." A juror in the back row leaned forward, whispering something to the man beside him. The gallery murmured louder now, the energy shifting. The smug certainty that had filled the room earlier was dissolving into unease. Judge Grayson banged his gavel lightly. "Order. Let him continue." Carrington's jaw tightened. He shot a glance at the judge, then back at Jalen. "So, your claim is that you just happened to test drive a car that was stolen shortly after?" "Yes," Jalen said simply, "and there's paperwork to prove it. The dealership keeps logs. My name is signed in that log, time-stamped, with the salesperson who assisted me as a witness." He paused, his voice steady as stone. "I move to subpoena those records." The gallery erupted again, this time louder. Even Denise, who had sat stoically behind her son, covered her mouth with her hand in awe. She had known he was sharp, but the precision, the composure, it was more than she imagined. Carrington's polished performance was cracking. He flipped through his documents again, fumbling slightly. "Regardless," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier authority, "officers pursued you in that car. That is undisputed." Undisputed or unchallenged? Because I'd like to challenge it. You claim officers pursued me in that vehicle through downtown. Yet not one traffic camera, not one surveillance feed, not one body cam video has been submitted to this court. Isn't that strange? A car chase through Los Angeles and somehow there's no video? Carrington opened his mouth, but no words came out. He adjusted his tie, glanced at the jury, then back at Jalen. Jalen leaned in slightly, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "Do you know why there's no footage? Because the chase never happened. At least, not with me behind that wheel." The room buzzed. Even Judge Grayson sat up straighter, his smirk faltering. Jalen continued, his tone sharp but measured. "And if the court allows me, I can prove it. That night, I was on a FaceTime call with a friend from 9 to 10 p.m., the same time the supposed chase took place. My phone records, his phone records, and our GPS logs confirm our locations. I wasn't anywhere near downtown. I was at home." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Carrington's face flushed red, his polished armor shattering with every word. "Your Honor," Jalen said firmly, "I request to introduce my phone records as evidence. They'll show my location history for that night and confirm I wasn't driving any stolen vehicle." Judge Grayson tapped his gavel, his brow furrowed. "Prosecution, do you have a response?" Carrington stammered. Your Honor, these claims are unsubstantiated. He's manipulating technicalities. Technicalities, Jalen cut in, his voice sharper now, anger flashing briefly before he reined it back in. The truth isn't a technicality. You dragged me into this courtroom with accusations built on sand. You painted me as a criminal based on assumptions and sloppy police work. But when I demand real evidence, suddenly it's a technicality? The gallery erupted in claps and cheers before the bailiff shouted for silence. For the first time, Judge Grayson didn't shut Jalen down. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing on Carrington. Well, counselor, why haven't phone records or surveillance footage been submitted?
The tension inside the courtroom had reached its peak. Carrington's confidence was in ruins, and the jury's eyes, once glazed over with boredom, now burned with curiosity, hanging on Jalen's every word. The judge, who once wore a mocking smirk, leaned forward, elbows on the bench, no longer dismissive, but genuinely intrigued. Jalen took a deep breath and stepped closer to the jury box, his voice calm yet commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is more than sloppy prosecution. It's not just about me being framed for a stolen car. This is about a system that assumes guilt before innocence, especially when you look like me. The gallery went silent. Even the reporters, their pens poised mid-air, froze to capture every syllable. Jalen raised his hand, holding up his phone. You've been told a story, a neat little package of lies. That I stole an Audi, that I ran from the police, that I'm some criminal who needs to be locked away. But the truth is uglier. The truth is, someone needed a scapegoat. The jury shifted in their seats. A few nodded unconsciously. Why me? Jalen continued, his tone sharpening. Why not the dozens of other test drivers who touched that same car? Why not investigate further? Because I was convenient. I was young, I was black, and I was easy to blame. Carrington shot to his feet. Objection! He's playing to emotion. Objection overruled, Judge Grayson interrupted, his voice unexpectedly stern. He fixed his gaze on Jalen. Continue. For the first time, the judge sounded invested, not condescending. Jalen didn't miss a beat. He tapped the projector screen again, and a new slide appeared. It wasn't evidence from the police. It was a screenshot of a text conversation. Gasps erupted as Jalen explained. These are text messages between Officer Ruiz, the same officer who claims to have seen me behind the wheel, and a tow yard employee. They discuss a payoff, a deal to make sure the case sticks. I obtained them through a public records request after I noticed inconsistencies in his report. Carrington's face drained of color. He scrambled through his papers, visibly panicked. The gallery exploded in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel for order, but his eyes never left Jalen. You see, Jalen said, his voice cutting like a blade, this wasn't about justice. It was about convenience, about building a case, not finding the truth, about painting me as guilty so they wouldn't have to look for the real culprit. Carrington's voice cracked. Your Honor, these texts, this is inadmissible unless authenticated. And I've already filed a motion for authentication, Jalen shot back. He turned to the jury, his tone softer now, almost pleading. I stand before you not as some seasoned lawyer. I'm just a 19-year-old kid who studied every law book he could find because I had no choice, because I knew if I didn't fight, no one else would fight for me. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even Denise, who had sat frozen through the ordeal, wiped tears from her cheeks, pride radiating through her grief. Jalen took a deep breath, his voice steady, final. So ask yourselves, does the prosecution story make sense? Do they have real evidence,
or just convenient lies? And more importantly, if this can happen to me, what does that say about the system we all trust to protect us? The silence was suffocating until a single sound pierced it. A juror sniffled, dabbing at her tissue with a tissue. Another juror leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. The gallery buzzed again, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. Carrington slumped in his chair, his face pale, his career unraveling before his eyes. Judge Grayson sat back, his expression unreadable now, but the smirk was long gone. And in that moment, it wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. The jury will review the evidence. As people stood, the gallery erupted in whispers and exclamations. Denise rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her son. She whispered, "You did it, baby. No matter what happens, you already won." And Jalen, for the first time in months, allowed himself to breathe. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was exposing the cracks in a system that had nearly swallowed him whole.